The way I see the synthesizer market being driven today is through two distinct drives. One, the drive towards the future through innovation, and one, the drive towards the past through nostalgia. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of each in today's video. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about innovation versus nostalgia and how these two forces are shaping the current synthesizer market in dramatic ways. So if you have these two on kind of a spectrum, you have companies that are way more focused on nostalgia, and then you have companies that are way more focused on innovation in the instruments they're creating and the kind of ways they're pushing sound design and synthesis forward. So if I had to put it on a spectrum, you have nostalgia over here and you have innovation over here. You can kind of place companies somewhere along those lines. You know, Roland and Yamaha might be over here a little bit focused on the nostalgia. You know, there's some innovation going on. Then Behringer is really focused on nostalgia, although they're doing it in innovative ways, I guess you could say. And then there's Korg, who's you know, they do their reissues, but they've also done a ton with the Volcas and the Logue series. And then you have companies like Arturia, who has all their VSTs that are focused in the past, but all their instruments are brand new kind of innovations and new creations. So all of these companies kind of either speak to one or both of these drives, and you can see these drives present really heavily in the instruments that are being put out. And you might be tempted to say, you know, nostalgia is better, or innovation is better, as a better drive to use in creating instruments. But really, I think there are pros and cons to both. And so I just wanted to have a little rant about what I think some of the pros and cons of each of these forces is. So first, let's talk about nostalgia. What are some of the pros of the nostalgia force that is driving instrument creation? I would say the pros are there's a whole bunch of people out there, specifically, and Behringer understands this really well, that have wanted classic synths from the 70s and 80s that were, at the time, way too expensive for them to own, and today are still way too expensive for them to own, and way too much maintenance, and there's just not enough. Behringer has swooped in and basically decided to recreate these in hardware analog formats to make them accessible to a whole new generation of musicians. That is commendable, and I think nostalgia is, you know, the driving force there, and it's reintroduced so many people to these great instruments from that era. What's interesting also is there's some really great things about instruments from that era. You know, rediscovering analog, rediscovering some of the simplicity of the layouts, and you know, they're not the most complex instruments, but they're a far cry from romplers and some of the digital synths of the 90s and early 2000s. It helped people rediscover what was magical about these instruments and what was unique. If you look at the era that these were created in, the same thing was going on. You know, the patches people were creating where they were trying to make realistic sounding guitar and piano and trumpet sounds, and that the drive towards realism really shaped the development of analog synthesizers, going to digital synthesizers, going to, you know, romplers, and going to sample-based technology. All that drive for realism was present, and it was looking towards the past of realistic instruments. Now we're exploring and appreciating analog instruments not for their realism, but for their non-realism, for the interesting sounds that you can only make with these instruments. And so nostalgia has helped us rediscover what's unique and particular and worth holding on to about the past. What's some downsides to nostalgia? You know, nostalgia can hold back moving into the future. You know, sometimes the sounds are tired. You know, how many times can you hear a Juno 60 in different formats in music? You know, how many times can you hear TR-808? And you can have sound fatigue from some of these sounds once they've been rediscovered, once they've been mass-produced. And if there was no innovation, then you would be stuck in kind of this recycled sound, recycled instruments. And so nostalgia can sometimes, lead to silly things like 20 different clones of the same thing and just hearing the same music over and over again, not creating new music, creating new genres. So I would say those are some of the downsides of the nostalgic drive. It's not oriented towards to things that aren't created yet, towards genres that aren't created yet. Nostalgia is going to push us back towards what we've already done. So let's talk about innovation and where that is a very powerful force. And the pros, I think it's a little more obvious what the pros of innovation are. You get new technologies, you get new sound palettes, you get new genres of music, you get easier ways to do things, you get cheaper ways to do things. The innovation in itself has a positive connotation, and so the pros are kind of self-evident, I think. I think the Polybrute is a perfect example of innovation in its finest, and I really can't stop thinking and playing with it. I think it's already won the 2021 Best Synth, in my mind, award. But there are some downsides to innovation as well, and I think those aren't always talked about. So with innovation, sometimes, there's fads, and I guess I'll talk about the past to kind of contextualize this. So the obsession with realism in the 80s led to the death of kind of analog synthesizers for a very long time. And that was innovation at the time. Digital synths, the sounds that FM synths were making, the sounds of romplers, they were completely mind-blowing. And because the basic drive was towards realism, the analog synths got discarded, and the other kind of unique things about them were forgotten and, they just disappeared for 40 years-ish. And it's just now that we're rediscovering that, and innovation sometimes throws the baby out with the bathwater. So there are things that are, when things become no longer a fad, the good parts as well as the bad parts, the unique parts as well as the not so great parts are completely discarded. It just tends to happen that way. So innovation sometimes leads to kind of throwing out the good parts of what's going on today and forgetting about that. So, we are probably forgetting something or losing sight of something. Actually, I just thought of an example. With the analog renaissance, there is kind of a bias towards digital being lesser or not as good as analog sound. And I think that is really a mistake. There's really magical things that happen. There's very powerful things that you can do with digital synthesis. I think Dave Smith has shown this more so than anyone with his hybrid instruments using both digital and analog oscillators. My first hybrid synth was the Dave Smith Polyevolver, and he's spoken, and I've heard this multiple times from different synth designers, that digital oscillators are simply capable of a lot more than analog oscillators. And I think that with this kind of fascination with analog and this kind of return to the beauty of analog, that is being forgotten, and it might, manufacturers might not be incentivized to continue pushing forward. I think Korg's done a great job with the Op6. I think the Novation Summit is also a great instrument that's largely digital, but you can see with their success, the Novation Summit has not been as successful as some of the other pure analog polysynths, and I think largely because digital is kind of out of vogue right now. So that's an example of the kind of opposite thing happening in today's world. Innovation versus tradition. Always at work, always at play. Kind of fun to think about. Thought I would share. Would love to hear your thoughts below. What else can be said about these two forces? Am I just blowing hot air? Is there something? Is this even interesting? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Again, if you enjoyed the video, hit your subscribe button, turn on your notifications. If you want to talk more, you can find us at alamomusic.com. Shoot us an email, give us a call. Love to chat with you. Thanks for watching.